Hello and welcome to Capitol Hill. I'm Lyndal Curtis. For the second day in a row, the federal government has delivered bad news in the morning but received good news in the afternoon. Yesterday it walked away from a planned increase to family tax benefit Part A. Today it's delaying a lift to the tax-free threshold planned for 2015 because the carbon price it was helping to compensate for isn't expected to be as high as forecast. Yesterday, the good news was delivered via a cut in official interest rates. Today, it comes courtesy of the Queensland Government, which has signed up to disability care. Joining me this evening is Liberal MP Don Randall and Labor MP Ed Husic. Welcome to you both.
Afternoon to you both.
Lyndal, and to you, Ed.
We'll go first to the confirmation this morning that the government will be delaying the increase to the tax-free threshold due to be delivered in 2015 because it's expecting the carbon price to be lower than first forecast.
The carbon price forecast will be revised in this budget, but I emphasise again, a lower carbon price in 2015-16, still 2 years away, means that the cost to our economy of cutting our pollution will be lower. The costs to households and businesses will be lower, and that is a good thing.
The essential point that the Australian people are coming to understand is this. If you couldn't trust last year's budget, why should you trust this year's budget? If you couldn't trust last year's budget, why should you trust this year's budget?
Ed, delaying compensation because it was no longer deemed to be necessary has never been flagged as an option by the government, even when ministers like Greg Combet were being asked about the prospects of a lower than expected carbon price. Is this a broken promise?
No, I think it's a reflection of the fact that when you look at international markets that have pounded the European carbon price, which we're linking to, you have to face the facts. You have to live up to reality, and there's no point going through, to get to your question, there's no point going through endless speculation. I mean, the budget is the right place to make these announcements, and so what we're saying is that in 2 years' time we expect that the carbon price will be lower, and as a result its impact on the economy will be lower, and as a result the $1.59 per week that would have gone for people earning up to $80,000 won't necessarily happen. But if the carbon price does increase on the international stage, then we obviously had things in place, mechanisms in place to deal with it. So, you know, it's a recognition of reality.
But if it's a recognition of a reality now, why wasn't it flagged as an option or considered when the government was being asked about whether people would be effectively overcompensated if the carbon price fell?
Because if you look at what we did, and we did put in place tax cuts, we put in increases to family benefits. We've, in terms of the increase to the tax-free threshold, I mean, these things that were delivered were being put in place, and we were getting on with the job of doing this. Now, we can either go through the process or the circus of speculation, or get on with the job. We opted for getting on with the job. We're getting close to a budget where we need to revise these figures. That's what we're doing.
Don, for the second day in a row, the government's cutting its own spending and likely to feel some political pain because of it. Isn't that what you've been calling on the government to do?
Well, Lyndal, they're cutting spending because they're running out of money, and they're running out of money because they've totally miscalculated. This is a government in chaos. It's running the Australian economy as a shambolic exercise, and what's happening is this is another government broken promise. And as Kevin Rudd said not so long ago, and I'm sure Ed agrees with me because he was a Kevin Rudd supporter, Julia Gillard is now providing a stuff up a day, and this is just another one of them.
But why is it a government in chaos and a government stuffing up when they're doing what you called on them to do, which is cut their own spending?
No, Lyndal, what this is about, and let's be clear, this is not about cutting spending because they're, managing the economy well. They're cutting spending because the carbon tax isn't collecting anywhere near the money. They didn't do the modelling properly. We warned them, and this is why we've been scrutinising the government for so long, that the international experience wasn't anything the same. We know that the carbon trading mechanism in Europe now is about $4 a tonne. Australia's still paying $23 a tonne. Last budget we were told we'd be paying on July 1 this year $24.15 a tonne. So as a result, they have totally miscalculated. there should be some actuaries actually that work alongside the government to make some forecasts so that they eventually get it right. At the moment, they're just getting it horribly wrong, and the Australian economy and the Australian people and the low-income earners are suffering because of it.
Ed, the Climate Change Minister, Greg Combet, has confirmed that the forecast for the carbon price will be lowered in next year's budget. Is there any certainty that next year's figures are going to prove to be accurate?
Well, I mean, you sort of asked a similar, well, you sort of touched on similar points earlier, Lyndal, about, you know, in terms of, you know, as I described it, speculating about where the price might go. I think what we're trying to do is, in the course of the budget, to demonstrate over, you know, the 12 months of the financial year coming, where things will stand, and we're just trying to, you know, provide that degree of certainty as much as you can in volatile economic conditions internationally. So what we've tried to do is make our system a lot more realistic and reflect world conditions. On the other side, we have still a commitment to a direct action plan that will see money taken out of the budget to pay polluters. A huge amount of money on top of the paid parental leave scheme that the Coalition is promising to hit corporations with in terms of their tax increase. So the question now has to also go to the Coalition that is planning to fund polluters. Where are they getting the money to do it? We are realistically adjusting what we're doing, and they have given no detail about how they will fund direct action, as they call it.
Well, Don, if I can ask about one of those points, isn't it the case that there's always some inherent uncertainty in forecasts, and isn't that a problem you have with forecasts about the amount of company tax revenue you'll get to pay for a fixed spend on paid parental leave?
Look, Lyndal, Graham Richardson said the other day that either the government is incompetent and unable to sort of get the figures right, or Treasury. Now, one of them has to go responsible for the forecasts because they're the government. Treasury's
But they
supposed to
are,
be the honest
after all,
broker.
only forecasts. They're not.
But Lyndal, there is such a disconnect between the actual figures and what the government has projected. $23 a tonne was the highest in the world. They sent this brochure around to every Australian to tell them how good this was going to be and how good it was for them based on their own figures and research. It is a sham, and they've lied to the Australian people on what they would do in terms of compensating them, and they've now lied in terms of the ability to reduce the carbon footprint in Australia, because none of this has stopped any of the polluters from polluting.
Well, complain about, they initially complained about the size of the carbon price. They're now complaining about the reduction in the carbon price. They're now talking about forecasts and why they're different. And my simple question to Don is,
well, the carbon price
why is it that in late January, Don, the Coalition attempted to quietly ditch its promise that within 1 year of government it would deliver a surplus, and now you're saying you won't?
Oh, Ed, how can you even go near, you know, promising surpluses when Wayne Swan said he would have one this year come hell or high water? Don't go there, Ed, because you've got egg on your face when it comes to surpluses.
The thing is, well, I was just going to make a very quick point. You know, if reality changes, you have to responsibly adapt. Now, your side of politics has dropped a commitment to deliver a surplus in 1 year. Both sides of politics realise the challenges that persist because of a high dollar impacting on company company profits, which impact on corporate tax rates and the revenue we gain from it. The reality is we can talk the politics, we can run the lines, but what we're faced with is a revenue shortfall, and you've still not described how you are going to fund direct action.
Ed, if I can ask you just one more question on this.
Sure, sorry.
The government's made cuts to education, superannuation and low-income earners, things that will be seen to be core Labor areas. Do you understand the strategy behind the cuts the government's made?
Well, can I just take
and
you
the
on...
single mothers?
Well, yeah, and I've raised those points previously, but I've never heard you defend single mothers either, Don.
Read my speech in the House about the single mother of my electorate.
Don, I'm just looking for an answer to my question.
I did want to take you, if I can put it to task, Lyndal, on the reference to the cuts to low-income families. We've delivered some very big things in terms of changes to the tax-free threshold, the lift in family tax, and what we've talked about in the last 24 hours. And I'll be equally frank, of course I don't like it. I'd love to see people, particularly in my area, get more money. We are not taking money away. What we're saying is we can't deliver at this point, given the revenue, the extra money that we would have put in. And the fact of the matter is that does obviously cause pain, but what we're talking about is trying to deal with the fact that revenue has sunk. And again, we are trying to be upfront, we're trying to deal with these things. The other side of politics can talk the slogans, but very short on the detail. What are they going to do?
We might go now to the National Disability Insurance Scheme. Queensland today signed up to the scheme. The Prime Minister went north to make the announcement with the Queensland Premier.
With today's agreement, we reached the stage where almost 90% of Australians are going to be covered by disability care. The agreements are done to cover almost 90% of Australians. So can I use this opportunity to say to the Chief Minister of the Northern Territory and to the Premier of Western Australia, I do want to work with you to make sure that those places and the people in them, the Northern Territory and Western Australia, get covered by this scheme too.
I want to thank the Prime Minister for making the decision on the levy. This is a new, important scheme. It is something we haven't done before, and it's important that Australians who say they want to help understand that when you say you want to help and you ask government, whether it be the state or the federal governments, to chip in and to do something, then ultimately we're the ones as a community that have to chip in.
Don, only Western Australia and the Northern Territory haven't signed up. Does the fact that Queensland has signed on today make coalition support, federal coalition support for the Medicare levy increase certain?
Well, obviously, because the coalition said that we want to work with the government to see that this scheme's implemented. But do remember, it was Campbell Newman 12 months ago who, at the Lodge with the other premiers, said, Prime Minister, have we got a way for you to get this? And that is to put a levy on. And then she came out and said she wouldn't do a levy. She's changed her mind. We're pleased she's changed her mind. But at the end of the day, this is going to now create a large bureaucracy in Canberra where the states used to manage these functions. We think it should happen. We're so pleased now that it's going to be brought into the Parliament so that we can see the detail of it, how it will be funded, who's in, who's out, are there any exemptions? So we're very pleased to scrutinise this, and I suspect when we scrutinise it to find out, you know, who's going to be left out or not included, we'll be accused of being negative. We just want to see the detail in the Parliament, and that's what Tony Abbott got out of Julia Gillard in this agreement.
Ed, the Queensland Premier today made it clear that he's very happy that the Prime Minister has now adopted the Medicare levy, and he thinks that people are glad to contribute to this from their own pockets. Do you think maybe it would have been a good idea to adopt the levy a little earlier?
Well, I spoke in Parliament in February, actually, pushing the concept of increasing the Medicare levy because the fact that Medicare was always there as a safety net, if you will, for healthcare, and we were going to stretch it a bit further to assist those in need for the disabled families and their carers. And I do recall at the time opposition spokespeople, and you have to excuse me for the smirk I had on my face as you start asking me the question, because Don was very good. He was almost suggesting that this was something that they were supporting, when in actual fact they disagreed in response to my proposition that the Medicare levy be increased. It is very important that we do it.
But you're not the Minister, Ed.
I understand
you're not the Minister?
I understand that.
I'm sorry, we'll have to leave it there. Don Randall and Ed Husic, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Lyndal. Thanks, Don.
Thank you very much, Lyndal. Thanks, Ed.
And thank you for joining Capitol Hill. Please be with us at the same time tomorrow. Good night.